Hello, welcome. My name's Emil and this is going to be my 20 tips for how to learn a foreign language. So I spent the past few years learning foreign languages. First of all, I went to Turkey and I lived in Istanbul for 6 months. And I was able to get my Turkish up to a strong beginner level. I was just breaking into intermediate level when I left. Then after that, I came to Spain. So here I am in Spain. I switched to Spanish and I was able to get to an intermediate level in less than a year. I was basically at a strong intermediate level, I guess in a year, maybe a bit more. And you can do it faster than that as well. If you really apply yourself, it's definitely attainable. So I think there's a misconception, I guess, at least with British people, that learning another language is kind of impossible, it's not really doable. So what I would say is it's definitely doable. You can attain it if you just apply yourself consistently. So tip number one is jump straight in. So once you know what language you want to study, and you probably already know, right, is to just jump straight in. And so the way I'd say to do this is download Duolingo on your phone for free. And I'm not affiliated with them, not affiliated with anything. But what I would say is start doing the lessons that they have on there. So if you could do half an hour or an hour each night, do that for a week or 2 or 3 and see how you go. It's just going to be the best way to jump in and start learning, start getting exposure to that language. So whilst you're doing the lessons on Duolingo, what I would say is to always read out the phrases that it presents you out loud, to get your mouth used to making these sounds and just to really solidify what you're learning. So just always read it out loud if possible. Tip number 2 is learn pronunciation as soon as possible. So obviously as you're learning this new language, everything that you learn, if you have bad pronunciation, that's permeating everything that you learn. And so after a year or 2, it's going to be much more difficult to fix that after you've already learned a lot of stuff. And it's also obviously going to be easier for people to understand you if you're pronouncing as well as possible. So you'll find that depending on what language you've chosen, some sounds and some words are probably going to be really difficult, probably to the point that you can't even say the word. But if you stick with it, you'll find that it just becomes a lot easier with time. My next tip is to watch Peppa Pig. Okay, so Peppa Pig is designed for kids to learn language, right? So if it's good enough for kids, it's good enough for me, it's good enough for you. They basically focus around a concept in language in an episode. So for example, a treehouse or a rainy day, and it's just a really good way to focus on certain vocabulary as if you're a child starting from the beginning again. Whilst you're watching Peppa Pig, use headphones so that you can really hear clearly the words and start to get your brain familiar with these sounds. And this is a good way to get more exposure to the language. So watch that for half an hour during that jump in stage, or as much as you can bear basically. And if you find that you're not understanding anything, I would say go back to your Duolingo, do a bit more of that, and kind of go between them. And you're going to find that you start picking up words, you start becoming able to understand a bit. Tip number 4 is to start listening to music in the language that you're trying to learn. So if you're like me, I'm quite lucky that as I work on a computer all day, I can sometimes listen to Spanish in headphones for like 8 hours a day, all day. And so what you'll find is this is just a good passive way to learn. So even at the start, if you don't understand any of the words, the lyrics, you're just exposing your brain to these sounds and getting used to them. And in general, it's just a good way to learn passively. And it's also a good way to get exposure to the culture of the language that you're trying to learn. Maybe you find some songs that you like, you listen to them over and over again, you'll start learning the lyrics, and eventually what I like to do is start listening to rap music. Because it's so fast, it's a really good way to get your brain hearing this rapid pace of lyrics and to try and start processing them. Next up, know the levels. So there's this thing called the European Framework for Language Levels. You might have heard of before, and it's good to get a familiarity with what these levels are, so that maybe if you're thinking of doing a course, or even if not, just to know what level you're at, and it's a good way to gauge what kind of steps you could be taking next. So there's 6 levels. It's A1 and A2, which are beginner. After that you've got B1 and B2, which is intermediate, independent user, and then afterwards C1 and C2, which is advanced. You're just completely competent and you're able to work out misunderstandings and small nuances in the language. Number 6 is get a copy of the Fluent Forever book by Gabriel Viner, I think his name is. So I got this book, it's really good, it's really easy to read, very well written, and you don't even need to read all of it. Like again, I just read a third of it and that was enough to set me down a path of trying out some things he was saying, and it's just really helpful. So some of the things that he talks about I'm touching on now. But yeah, if you get a copy of that book, I think it's really going to help you. Tip number 7 is to get a dictionary on your phone. So this is maybe an obvious step, but you just want to limit the amount of time that it takes you to find out what a word means. So get a dictionary app on your phone. Depending on what language it is, you're going to have to find out what's available. For Turkish, I use Turing, which is really good. And for Spanish, I use Spanish Dict, which is also just really great. Bringing me on to point number 8, which is word frequency lists. So you might want to start doing this near the beginning, after the jump in stage, is to find a word frequency list. So you can find these on Wikipedia, or you can also get books for them. So what it is basically a list of the most common words that come up in a language. So if you search, for example, Spanish word frequency list, you're going to get a list of the top 100 or top 1,000 words that are used in that language. And you just basically start at the top, start reading down until you find a word that you don't know. And then what you can do is look up the meaning in your dictionary and maybe write it down somewhere, record it, which another thing we're going to come on to is doing that. So tip number 9 is move to the country whose language you're trying to learn. Maybe that's an obvious step. It's going to be the most obvious way to get as much immersion as possible. If you're able to do that, it's just really great. I mean, obviously, you've got so many opportunities to speak with native speakers. You're kind of forced to in everyday life. And it's just going to be a really good way to start making progress and showing your brain that this is something actually useful that you can use in everyday life. So if you're not able to do that, you're just going to have to work harder on creating immersion for yourself. And that's by using all of these avenues that I'm showing you or finding your own ones. Tip number 10 is avoid the English speakers. So this only really applies if you've moved to the country where they speak the language you're trying to learn. And this was advice given to me by my good friend Julia when I was in Turkey. And she said, just avoid the English speakers, at least in a social context. If you meet some people and they're either native English speakers or they speak English, just avoid them because you're going to end up speaking in English and you're not going to learn anything from them. Or maybe a few things, but basically the people who don't speak any English, you're going to learn the most from them because you'll be in situations where you're forced to try and communicate, try and tell a story, and you're just going to learn so much from them. So next up, study the grammar that's useful. The thing about learning another language is that you do have to study grammar, and that's maybe the least exciting thing, but also the most important. But what I would say is to tackle it in this way, to learn the thing that's most useful to you at the point that you're in. So you can start off with present tense, for example. Just learn some verbs, some common everyday verbs like eat, run, walk, work, and learn how to use them in the present tense. So you're going to say, I walk, I go, I work, today I work, for example. And what you can do is, you don't know past tense yet, but you can learn some words such as yesterday or last week or last year, and then just use present tense with them. So for example, yesterday I work, yesterday I eat, yesterday I go. So this isn't correct, right, obviously, but you can use it to get your point across to people and they're going to understand what you're saying. You can also do the same for the future. So learn the words for tomorrow, next week, in summer, and then you can say, in summer I work, next week I go, tomorrow I eat. And obviously it's not correct, but people are going to understand you. Once you're able to communicate like that, then you want to start learning one of the past tenses that's going to be most useful. So yesterday I ate, yesterday I walked, and then after that the future, I will go, I will eat, and then after that conditional. So just study the grammar that's going to be most useful to you in that point to allow you to tell people what you've been doing in your life or tell stories and start understanding what they're saying to you as well. Tip number 12, and this might be quite an obvious one, is do a course. So I really recommend this. Doing a course is fantastic. I did a course in Turkish and I also did some Spanish courses as well. This is going to be great for things like the grammar, which it's difficult, maybe some people struggle to study that on their own. If you do a course, you're basically going to have someone, telling you to do it, making you do it, and that's really good. And they're just going to guide you through for the level that you're at. So if you think about doing a course, the first thing that's going to happen is you go there and they make you do a level test, they'll have a chat with you, they'll work out what level you're on and say, okay, I think you're ready for this course or that course. And then when you're on the course, maybe it's a bit scary at first. Like in my experience, you're a bit worried, you're thinking, maybe I don't know as much as other people, oh, I'm not good enough. Eventually, like you'll realize that probably everyone's feeling that way, and it gets a lot easier until the point that it's boring, and you'll be sitting there thinking, it's like sitting in school with the teacher talking about something, and you're a bit like, can we go now? This is boring. So what I would say is, if it's feeling boring, that's success. Like when it comes to courses, boring is success. Like you want it to feel boring. Okay, so tip number 13 is fail fast. So this applies to learning anything in a lot of ways in life. But I've seen this amongst people, like people that I've met on language courses and stuff. They're too scared to make mistakes. They want to be perfect, and so if they're not sure how to say something, they'll kind of keep quiet because they don't want to get it wrong. What I would say is fail as much as possible, get as many things wrong as possible, because all of those mistakes that you make are learning experiences, and they're kind of emotional learning experiences as well, because if you've moved to the country, for example, where they speak the language you're trying to learn, and you're out in the world, you're trying to do things, and you're failing, you're making mistakes. This is an emotional thing where you think, oh, that was annoying, I wish I didn't do that. It creates a strong memory in your head, and it's something to reflect upon, and it's ultimately a learning experience. Tip number 14 is to get drunk. Okay, so obviously you don't want to be getting drunk at home on your own and studying or anything like that, because the alcohol is going to stop you making memories very well. But I found this is a good thing to do. Obviously it's difficult now because of COVID, but you're going to be able to do this in future, is, especially if you've moved to the country where they're speaking that language, if you can go out to a bar, have a few drinks, you're usually going to end up meeting someone in the smoking area or outside, and you start having a chat, and this is a great opportunity to explore, like to try out what you've learned at the level that you're at. So try and tell some stories, whoever you're having a chat with, and they're going to try and tell you some stories as well. Like usually you'll find a nice person who's patient, empathetic. They're going to listen to you. They're going to try and tell you some stuff, and you're probably going to learn some words. And so obviously if you're out and about having a drink at some bars or whatever, this could last quite a few hours. So it's a good amount of time where you're speaking, you're being social, you're loosened up, and you're having a lot of exposure in that language, and the next day, your brain's going to have processed it. Hopefully, a lot of it is going to stick. Tip number 15 is to use a spaced repetition system, or SRS. So if you've been doing Duolingo, you've actually already been using an SRS without maybe knowing it. So what this is basically a system of flashcards, and you can do it with paper, but it's a lot easier to use an app. The app I use is called Anki, and I'd recommend it. So with this system of flashcards, it's basically bespoke to the things that you're trying to learn, because you're going to make the flashcards. So it's really specific to your learning goals. So the way it works is you begin by making flashcards. So on the front, you're going to put maybe the foreign word that you're trying to learn or the concept. And then on the other side, you put the answer. So you make all these flashcards, you put them in the app, and then the app's going to show you one. You look at the front and you try to remember what this thing is. And then you look at the answer and you think, oh, okay, I got it right or wrong or whatever. But the app's going to present you with some options that you can choose for how easy it was to remember. So you can say it was very easy, or it was difficult, or just impossible, for example. And then the app's going to remember these answers, and it's going to use it to determine how soon, again, it needs to show you that flashcard. So the ones you're struggling with, the ones you don't know, it's going to show you them again a lot sooner, whereas the ones that you know, it's going to wait longer. It's going to wait a week or two, and it's going to work out a kind of schedule to show you these flashcards. So you just keep looking at them over time whenever you have free time, and you're looking at the things that you need to focus on more regularly, basically. A good time to use these is when you already understand a grammatical concept. So maybe you already understand how to say things in past tense. You know how the grammar works, but you're lacking words to use with it. So this is just a great time to use an SRS, because you can basically plug in tons of words, learn tons of words really fast, and then be able to use them when you're speaking. So tip number 16 is to visualize. So going back a bit to when we were talking about making mistakes or speaking to native speakers who teach you words, if you reflect on those experiences, it's good to try and connect a picture of that memory with the word that you learned. So I find that I do this for whenever I meet someone, a native speaker who teaches me a word, I kind of associate the word that I've learned with that memory and the image of that time. So if you can reflect on experiences you had, mistakes or anything like that, and you can connect what you've learned with that memory, it's going to make a strong link, which means that you don't forget it, because everything that you've learned is kind of connected to an experience in your life. You can also visualize things in the future or hypothetical situations. So I do this naturally, maybe everyone does, I'm not sure. But it's good to kind of do this. Maybe you're on your way to meet someone, maybe you're on a bus or a train or something. You can imagine what you're going to say to them or what they might say to you, and have this kind of hypothetical conversation in your head. Or just a complete hypothetical, like what would I do if someone burst through the window with a gun and said, you know, give me all your money. I don't know, like what am I going to say? How are they going to react? And imagine this in your head. Maybe something less stressful than that. But it's basically an opportunity to have a conversation at your own leisure in your head, and learn, you know, practice things without the risk of being slow or making someone else wait. Tip number 17 is to get some comics. So obviously this is a really good thing to do. Maybe you want to get a book, but you're not quite at that level yet, unless you get, you know, a children's book. But if you get comics, you can read something that's, you know, suitable for adults or teenagers, basically. And you're going to have the pictures alongside the dialogue. There's not tons of dialogue, so you've got the action next to the words. You can kind of connect what's going on. Even if you don't know a word, you can connect it to the picture and start picking up some words. Number 18, audiobooks. So you could check out if Duolingo, they do have a Spanish podcast. I'm not sure if they have it for other languages. This is kind of like an audiobook. So they have stories. The Duolingo one, at least, is partially in English and partially in Spanish. So this is a good entry point when you're at like an A2 level, you're a beginner, to start listening to some audiobooks, some stories. And the other thing you can do is check on Audible. They have audiobooks on there that are designed for specific levels. So maybe you're at B1 or A2, and they'll actually have books that are described for these people of these levels. So next up, get a real book. It's kind of tempting to get a book from the beginning, but you might find it a bit of a struggle because there's so many words that can come up in a book. And it's very difficult when you're at beginner level to break into that, and it could be a bit discouraging. But once you're making a lot of progress, for example, once you get to B1 or, you know, high A2, B1, you could probably get a copy of Harry Potter and start reading that. So yeah, getting a book once you're at that level is just a really good way to start learning more and practicing in a way that's enjoyable. So the way I've been doing this is I got the whole Harry Potter book series in Spanish, and so it's a good series to read because the earlier books, the language is for quite young kids, and as it progresses the language gets more advanced, the books get longer. So it's a good kind of series to use as you're progressing, because you start at that basic level and get better. And whilst you're reading books or comics or listening to audiobooks or any of this kind of stuff, I would say if there are words you don't know, because there's going to be tons, right? Just kind of gloss over them. As long as you can follow, you know, pretty much, you can follow the story. You don't need to keep checking like each word, because that's going to ruin the flow and take you out of that experience. So just try to read as much as possible, and maybe read the same thing multiple times, or, you know, and eventually you're going to see the same word coming up again and again, and then maybe it's time to check that one because it's really important maybe. Or you're just going to work out the meaning of words naturally just through encountering them so many times. Okay, so tip number 20, the final tip, is to be patient. So obviously learning a language is not easy, it is a challenge, and it's going to take time. And for me at least, I find that it's quite an emotional journey. You know, you have ups and downs. There are days where you're at a level where you've gone out and you've done something and you feel, you know, it's a high, you've done really well, you've had some kind of success, and you feel really good about it. But usually the next day or soon after that, there's going to be a down where you make a mistake or you have some kind of failure, and it feels bad. So be prepared for that emotional kind of journey that you're going to go on, and just be patient and try to see the mistakes as learning opportunities, and stay strong and just be consistent, keep applying yourself, and just keep going forward. And naturally, with time, you're going to get better as well, because your brain does need to get used to hearing these sounds and making these sounds with your mouth. So just with time, it just gets a lot easier as well. So yeah, it's doable, it's very rewarding, stick with it, and hopefully these tips can help you out. So in conclusion, I think what all of these tips, these avenues boil down to are immersion. You need to get as much immersion as possible, whether you've moved to the country where they speak that language, or you're at home in your native country and you're not able to travel. Just focus on creating as much immersion for yourself as you can with as many different avenues. Try some of the ones that I've said, maybe find some of your own ones, and that's going to help you make progress. So I hope this was helpful. If you liked the video, give it a like, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.